Bloomberg Audio Studios. Podcasts, radio, news. You're listening to the Bloomberg Balance of Power podcast. Catch us live weekdays at noon and 5 p.m. Eastern on Apple CarPlay and Android Auto with the Bloomberg Business app. Listen on demand wherever you get your podcasts or watch us live on YouTube.
Pretty good day for some golf, certainly if you're in Miami. Happening at the Trump National Doral, Miami, the House Republican Conference. On the ground, kumbaya, and yes, golfing to start things off today. We expect that we will hear from House Speaker Mike Johnson a little bit later on. 3 o'clock, 3:30, he's going to have a news conference at Doral. The official proceedings get rolling. A closed-door event with the boss himself, Donald Trump, of course, at Doral. About an hour's drive, I read, south of Mar-a-Lago. But boy, what a weekend it was as we try to unpack all of this. Donald Trump, fresh off Las Vegas. Did you see him at the craps table? He's in Las Vegas to rally the troops as if he were still in the campaign. And yeah, he did show up at a casino. Talked about the no taxes on tips. That's where this whole thing was born, right? Here's Donald Trump in Vegas.
I'll be working with Congress to get a bill on my desk that cuts taxes for workers, families, small businesses, and very importantly, keeps my promise for a thing called, and I know you didn't hear anything about this, and I'm sure it had no influence on the state, but I'm sure you haven't heard, but we're going to get it for you. No tax on tips. No tax on tips.
Love it. They loved it so much. Remember, even Kamala Harris picked that one up. And it is potentially complicating matters for those lawmakers who are tasked with extending the Trump tax cuts. This is just scratching the surface on what we need to cover with Laura Davison. She's with us now off a very busy weekend. Great to see you. Your team must be breathless here. We all said the same thing at the end of last week. Are we going to, this is the new normal again? We're going to do this every week?
There is no slowing down. Just keep your metabolism high and it'll keep flowing.
Well, so the arc of the weekend was incredible. It started with what they're calling the Friday Night Massacre. Harkening back to Richard Nixon, Donald Trump firing the inspectors general. This is a long list at the Departments of Defense, State, Transportation, Veterans Affairs, Housing and Urban Development, Interior, Energy, Commerce, and Agriculture, as well as the EPA, the SBA, and the Social Security Administration. That's a pretty broad swath of government. What's the point? Why? What is he doing here?
And I'll note this also includes some people that he appointed to these positions when he was in office. But the inspector general, these are really the people, they're typically not well liked within their agency because they're the auditors that are looking to, find holes in efficiency, where programs that aren't effective, where there may be gaps in funding and that the money's not being wisely spent. I'll note this is an interesting move for, someone who has had Elon Musk at his right-hand side saying he wants to root out, wasteful spending and all of these things. It's the IGs who actually go and find all of that. That would be sort of list number one on where you want to go. But this is clear that he wants to have all the people who are, doing this kind of work be loyalist, be in lockstep with him. He said this was something that normally happens. I'll just note that this is not a normal thing. Generally, these people span administrations and do not come and go.
So this is the so-called deep state, I guess he's trying to get at. To your point, though, these are some of his own appointees, and he failed to notify Congress. You have to give him 30 days or something on that. Does that matter or does nothing matter?
And with all of these, there are already been some questions raised about, the legality of this. Could this be challenged? But, with the fire hose of everything that's coming in, both the administration as well as sort of folks who are filing lawsuits challenging some of these moves, they have to prioritize. They can't, fight everything tooth and nail. Okay,
so we move on to the loyalty tests also happening now. About 160 staffers from the National Security Council were sent home. And they're combing through, I guess, their social media, prior statements. What are they looking for?
They're basically looking for anyone who may have criticized Donald Trump.
You're out of a job if that's the case?
They are likely out of the job. I mean, these are folks, these are civil servants. These are not political folks, even though they work for the National Security Council. They were sent home on Wednesday. They still have their things in their desks in the White House, but they were basically informed that they would be leaving, had their email access cut off, immediately escorted out of the building. They now essentially to come back when they go to pick up their stuff, most of them are assuming that they will not be coming back employed. Okay. They are escorted full-time. It is harder for them to get on the White House campus than it is for a foreign national.
Wow. This is, and by one of the most high-profile firings, the Coast Guard Commandant. this is, or was, Admiral Linda Fagan, the first woman to lead a branch of the U.S. military. Is that a good look for the administration?
Not particularly.
What'd she say wrong?
I don't know exactly on the reasons behind this one. But this is kind of what you see, Trump doing. You note he waited till Friday night to announce a lot of these. And these were, so this is, he is clearly looking at, both the federal workforce as well, sort of this upper echelon of management and people. He wants to install his own people or, force people to leave.
Amazing. Accused of an excessive focus on DEI at the Coast Guard Academy. Your point is you're probably not going to survive the scrub. If you got shown the door for a loyalty test, you're probably not coming back.
That's very, very likely. Yeah. And a lot of times they already have people who they sort of have identified to fill some of these, backfill some of these slots. I'll note that the incoming Trump team is way more organized than they were the last time. There's still, been a lot of the kind of that first week, a lot of staffers didn't have emails. So there was a lot of confusion as to exactly what's happening. But there is a plan and kind of, as more people get appointed, get their Senate confirmation, these are kind of being trickled down throughout the government.
This plays well with Trump supporters, though, right? Drain the swamp. That's what it looks like.
Absolutely. Yeah. The real question, though, is if you suddenly start cutting programs for things like food stamps or certain farm aid programs or things that affect people
bump into somebody
out in the community, that's when people might sort of realize, oh, I was counting on that subsidy I was counting on that payment. Yeah. And there's a constituency for essentially every program in the federal government. That's why it exists. And when you start cutting things, that's when the rubber meets the road.
As we spend time with Laura Davison here on Balance of Power, we almost had a trade war yesterday. It lasted for a couple hours. Maybe we did have a trade war. Maybe it was the shortest trade war of all time. Colombia. We stepped back from the brink. I saw an email go out around 11 o'clock last night. They got this done in time for business on Monday. What started this to bring Donald Trump to threaten a 25% tariff against Colombia? Because they've been intercepting these flights of migrants from the U.S., and that seemed to be working well until now.
So the Colombian government said that they would not accept this military plane that was coming with migrants, and they were both shackled at their ankles as well as handcuffed on their hands, and they really objected to.
The fact that it was military was the problem?
Yeah, it was sort of a confluence of the military. They also, in some of the statements that came out later, it was clear that they were concerned about sort of dignity, human rights around the treatment of their own citizens coming back. So that was sort of the points of negotiation throughout the day. But this is really going to be instructive on how Trump is thinking about tariffs. He said, look, this country did this thing I didn't like. They refused these flights that I want to go. So I'm going to come out and announce a tariff, effective immediately, 25%, announce additional sanctions and travel restrictions for the country's diplomats. And then Colombia was forced to immediately respond because a 25% tariff on anything coming into the U.S. would have been a really big deal for them. And within a matter of 5, 6, 7 hours, they were able to come to some sort of resolution that both the Colombian government was happy with and Trump was happy with, at least for the time being. We'll see if this crops up. But this is really the question as everyone's looking towards February 1, which of course is the date that Trump has said he wants to impose tariffs on Mexico, Mexico, Canada, and maybe China. Yeah. We'll see where that lands. And that's 6 days away. That's Saturday. So it's unclear if the tariffs are actually coming or if that's really more of a starting point for negotiations.
Yes. Yeah. That's a nice looking economy you got there. It'd be a shame if something happened to it. We haven't even talked about DeepSeek. We have a minute left. This is the story of the day at Bloomberg. The markets are falling out of bed over this. And Donald Trump at some point is going to have to respond, I suspect, unless you're going to tell me he has already. Considering the TikTok divest or ban, is this the next app to be banned by the Trump administration?
It certainly could be. We know from all the statements last week and the executive orders and the big press conference at the White House that he is very focused on AI. He says he wants to be dominant in AI. And this is the kind of thing that Donald Trump is very scared about, that China is going to come and sort of usurp the U.S.'s lunch. So I expect that we will see some response from him soon if he hasn't announced something in the past couple minutes since we've been talking.
There are national security implications here potentially, right? If they're scooping up Americans' data, it's kind of like TikTok all over again.
But with even more access to emails, access to location data, it would be
your Gmail
a huge,
account and your
huge
phone
change.
number. Good Lord. And it's only noontime on a Monday, as I said. Just think of the week that Laura's going to have. We'll go through this together with the help of Laura and her team. Thank you, as always, for being with us here on Balance of Power. I'm Joe Mathieu in Washington. We're going to go deep on DeepSeek. Coming up next with an expert on AI from CSIS. We sit down with Gregory Allen next, only here on Bloomberg.
You're listening to the Bloomberg Balance of Power podcast. Catch us live weekdays at noon and 5 p.m. Eastern on Apple CarPlay and Android Auto with the Bloomberg Business app. You can also listen live on Amazon Alexa from our flagship New York station. Just say, Alexa, play Bloomberg 1130.
This is a tough market, but we need to get the facts here. And we'll get back with Charlie in a bit to see how this is evolving. Hopefully not regressing. A more than 660-point loss here on the NASDAQ. The VIX is up 25%. It's kind of all you need to know. And it has everything to do with DeepSeek. As Charlie was just mentioning, it's where we started our day here. Everybody woke up to this news on the terminal. How many notifications about DeepSeek did you have? Or had you already downloaded it? Maybe you're part of this whole story. Enter Jevons paradox. Maybe you saw the tweet from Satya Nadella, the CEO of Microsoft. Jevons paradox strikes again. He writes, as AI gets more efficient and accessible, we will see its use skyrocket. He's defining it here, turning it into a commodity we just can't get enough of. Interesting and a great place to start our conversation with Gregory Allen. You've met Gregory before on this program. He is one of the foremost experts on AI in the nation's capital, and in fact, director of the Wadhwani AI Center at CSIS, the Center for Strategic and International Studies, former director of strategy and policy at the Department of Defense Joint Artificial Intelligence Center. This is the guy you need to hear from today. It's great to have you back. I can only imagine your thoughts when you see an AI story explode like this in the mainstream media. I've got a lot of specific questions for you that hopefully you will have answers to. But in terms of Jevons paradox, why does it matter here?
So I think the stock market is looking at DeepSeek and they're saying, oh my gosh, here is a company who has found a way to make pretty high quality AI much more widely available for much cheaper. So therefore, the price performance of a company like OpenAI, how are they going to justify that cost when suddenly it's so cheap to make? And the Jevons paradox has a really important answer to everybody who's out there shorting NVIDIA or shorting Microsoft right now. It basically says that as something becomes cheaper, people want more of it. So Jevons, the observation actually dates back to the Industrial Revolution, where he pointed out that steam engines are getting more and more energy efficient, but we keep using more and more coal. Because as we get more energy efficient, then you can economically justify using coal in an application that you couldn't before. The exact same thing is true in computing. The cost of one flop, one operation of computing, has dropped by, 20 trillion fold since, the 1950s when we first invented computers. But are we using more computers or are we using less computers? Are companies making more money selling computers or less money selling computers? The basic point here is that Microsoft is, thank goodness AI is so cheap, because now the universe of people who are going to want to buy it from me just grew a lot.
Fascinating. What does this mean for the energy companies, by the way? It's not just the NVIDIAs that are down. It's the Constellations and the others that we've been talking so much about. Clean, renewable. Is it going to be nuclear? Will we still need expensive energy if Jevons correct?
Well, it's the exact same phenomenon.
Decline in price as well?
No, it's the exact same phenomenon, just applied to the energy. If you go back 10 years, how much was data centers as a share of the U.S. electrical grid demand? It was hardly anything. But at the exact same time that computer chips got more powerful, that algorithms got more efficient, suddenly data centers are actually a pretty reasonable chunk of the U.S. grid. And now it's looking like they're going to consume a lot more. Well, increasing efficiency has already been a part of that story. An NVIDIA chip today is literally 10,000 times more efficient than an NVIDIA chip a decade or two ago. And at the same time that they're getting more efficient, at the same time that you're using less energy per unit of computation, you're making the economic and the business case that much more attractive for every additional use case for that competition.
I have to admit, this all sounds pretty positive in the grand scheme. So let's get to this case specifically and why Wall Street is so freaked out. DeepSeek, we're told this happened with $6 million in funding. Is that possible? Is that true?
So it's which part of the story you want to say.
Okay.
This specific model training run, right? When you're training an AI model, how much computation did you use on that one run? Yes, that was $6 million worth of computation. But there's all the other model training runs that didn't work. Right? When DeepSeek says that's what it costs, they didn't say their entire computing costs for all of their research and development, for all the work that went into creating this model was $6 million. They said this one individual training run was $6 million. Another thing to note here is part of the reason why everybody's so excited is this is a model that has reasoning capabilities. This is the advance that OpenAI came out with in the O1 series of models in September of last year. Well, it turns out what DeepSeek has proved is that upgrading a pretty decent base model, think like GPT-4, to a reasoning model, that is actually not as computationally intensive as had been understood widely in the press. But inside the big AI companies, OpenAI, Anthropic, they already knew all of this. They were already benefiting from all of this. Recall that Sam Altman said that O3, the most advanced category of model, the one that was blowing away benchmarks in December of 2024, he said the price of giving away that model usage, free. Right? So costs are coming down for everyone, not just for DeepSeek. What DeepSeek is doing is replicating a series of research that American AI companies had already been benefiting from. They just weren't sharing it loudly and publicly.
Okay. Did this company get its hands on NVIDIA chips? Or did it reinvent the wheel with some kind of popcorn chip that it stacked in a way that we've never seen before?
So according to this company, according to DeepSeek, they used NVIDIA chips.
All right.
But they specifically used NVIDIA H800 chips. So folks who watch the export controls debate in Washington, export control policy in Washington closely, such as myself, you may remember that in October 2022, that's when the Biden administration launched this AI chip restrictions, export controls strategy. But they got the performance thresholds wrong. They thought that they were saying, oh, you have to buy 2 generations old of NVIDIA chips. But what NVIDIA found out is actually if we make this one tweak to our existing best-in-class chips, they're actually legal to sell. So there was whereas the Biden administration was under the impression that they were putting China under like a 50 or 60% performance penalty, actually they were only imposing like a 10% performance penalty. And there was an entire year between October 2022 and October 2023 when it was illegal to sell unlimited numbers of these H800 chips.
So this is the whole story.
This is
what we need to
the
talk
story.
about.
They have been export controls have a lagging effect, right? It's not like you stop selling it and everything that's already in China magically blows up, right? They still have what they already bought. And in this case, we are dealing with the failure of the design of the export control architecture of October 2022. Later this year, we're going to start living through the success story of the October 23 architecture, the December 2024 architecture, and it came out of the mouth of DeepSeek's CEO. He said, the number one challenge my company faces is U.S. export controls, right? When Biden and Xi Jinping meet to discuss foreign policy issues, time and again, I've heard this from Biden administration officials, time and again, Xi Jinping changes the topic back to these export controls and why he needs them to go away immediately. He's not asking to get rid of them because they aren't working. He's asking to get rid of them because they are working, because they are imposing significant costs. Now, I don't want to suggest that there's no legitimate technical innovation underpinning this new DeepSeek model release. There's some legitimately impressive stuff in here. Folks who work at American AI labs are reading these papers. They are seeing innovations they can use. But think about what advantages America can secure that are durable and hard to replicate, and what advantages China can secure that are durable and hard to replicate. All of the algorithmic innovation, all of the architectural innovation that is represented in this DeepSeek model, 100% of it is available to American AI companies. They get to copy any new innovation. By contrast, all the computational advantages that American companies have, Chinese companies can't copy that because they can't make the chips.
Fascinating. So I'm listening to you, and I'm amazed by everything you're telling me, and I'm wondering why all these stocks are down today.
Well,
you're making the case to buy NVIDIA.
Well, I would say in the long term, the stock market is based on truth.
Sure.
But in the short term, sometimes it's based on vibes.
So
and the vibes
have
been pretty
money
bad.
Today is what's going on.
That would be my strong impression.
I mean, this isn't Blackwell we're talking about. It's not Rubin we're talking about.
Right. We're talking about DeepSeek. And it's legitimately important, right? This is an update in what people think is possible. But it's an update that folks who have been living in the AI industry are familiar with, right? Right now, we're living in the world of GPT-4 as the base model, O1 as the sort of reasoning model updates. But I remember when GPT-2 came out, and it was trained on a supercomputer, and now it runs on my laptop. And I remember when GPT-3 came out, and it was trained on a supercomputer, and now it runs on my laptop. So the point is here, there's no real update in paradigm. Computers start in supercomputers and they end up in personal devices, and that has been the trend literally since Alan Turing invented the first computer during World War II. It gets faster, smaller, cheaper. But at the same time, you have to ask yourself, what kind of durable competitive advantages can we create? Yeah. And I think it's worth pointing out that we are on the cusp of a threshold, right? Sam Altman himself early last year said that the performance of his model was, quote, mildly embarrassing at best. And he had the best one in the world. But the point is, we are maybe a year away, maybe a handful of years away from AI models being able to perform so many different tasks in the global economy. And in some cases, being able to do so at better than world expert levels. So we are approaching this threshold when AI will go from useful for some things, fun for some things, to shockingly useful at so many things. And the companies and the countries that cross that threshold first are going to have an extraordinary first mover advantage.
That's not what we're talking about here, though. We're out of time, basically. This sounds
well, we
like
got to talk about one more thing.
45 seconds. Go for it.
DeepSeek is having major outages right now.
Right.
They have attracted a lot of attention. They've got a lot of new user signups.
They're being attacked. Is that
They are not being attacked. They have run out of chips. It is the exact same story as when Gina Raimondo went to China in mid-2024, and they said that Huawei had a new phone, but they couldn't make enough chips for them. Now, they don't have enough chips to run the data centers to serve the users who want to use DeepSeek.
Huawei 2.0 here?
It's a very similar repeat of the story.
Amazing. Aren't you glad we had Gregory back with us today on Balance of Power? Fantastic CSIS. He's the mind you want to talk to and hear from today on Bloomberg.
You're listening to the Bloomberg Balance of Power podcast. Catch us live weekdays at noon and 5 p.m. Eastern on Apple CarPlay and Android Auto with the Bloomberg Business app. Listen on demand wherever you get your podcasts or watch us live on YouTube.
While we have heard from the AI crypto czar David Sachs, we have yet to hear from the President of the United States. Of course, just a week now into his term, but he is busy today. In fact, he was spending the early portion of today golfing at his Doral resort down in Florida.
A little morning golf, a little lunch, I guess, at poolside. Did you see there's a 125-foot slide at the pool?
Pretty cool.
Are the members using the slide this weekend? They might have to take the plunge on a couple of things here, Kailey. This is interesting. As we've talked about one bill or two, what's the agenda going to be? This is apparently the 2-day retreat that's going to decide it all.
Yeah, that's what we're referring to here, the Republican conference retreat in Doral, Florida, where Donald Trump will be speaking behind closed doors this evening to lawmakers, potentially outlining the way in which he'd like them to move forward on his legislative agenda. So for more insight on this now, joining us in our Washington, D.C. studio is Sarah Chamberlain. She's president and CEO of the Republican Main Street Partnership. Welcome back to Balance of Power. Sarah, I do wonder what Main Street members are planning to say in return to Donald Trump about the way in which they would advise his legislative agenda be pursued.
Well, the first thing is they are going down the slide. I'm hoping with this tight margin, nobody gets hurt. Fingers crossed.
No pictures coming
no,
out of
and
my
no
hand.
pictures. Oh, God, no pictures, please. So some of them have played golf with them. But what they're really advising is, they need one bill, and they need to make sure SALT is in it. Immigration is SALT. Immigration would definitely be in it. But they're really pushing SALT. It means a great deal to our California members, New York members, and actually our New Jersey members. So that is one area that they're pushing him hard on.
Got you. So how much of this is pep rally versus negotiation versus productivity? You've got a lot of factions, as we've discussed. In this Republican conference, is it Donald Trump's job to bring them together so they can come back to Washington to start writing legislation, or to make a deal that they can go home with?
So I think it's really, believe it or not, going to be a combination of both. Yeah. He is trying to rally them, get them on the same page, have them spend time together, doing fun activities like we already mentioned, and playing some golf. But there is a lot of business that's being discussed as well. You know, the one bill, they need the budget, Rex. I mean, they need to get all these things done by the end of February, and then go into hopefully the one bill. I wasn't sure about one bill or two, but now I'm convinced it's one bill, because I think we are going to have some Democratic help. So one bill, it's a little bit easier for the Democrats to swallow.
Well, so does John Thune need to be part of this retreat as well? It's one thing for House Republicans and the president to be on the same page, but the Senate's the other factor here.
It certainly is, and I know the Speaker is very much in touch with the Senator, so I know he's not there, but I would be surprised if the Speaker's not on the phone with him occasionally this weekend.
Interesting. You just mentioned some of the ingredients here, not the least of which is salt, pun intended, but you've got no tax on tips. We talked to Kevin Brady about this at the end of last week. No tax on overtime, so many different things that would be put into one bill that you start wondering what gets left out. Are we going to have a debt ceiling as part of this? Will emergency funding for wildfires and hurricanes be part of this? Because now we're in a world where there's something for everyone and no one can say no. Is that the plan?
True. I definitely think the emergency funding will be put into it. Not sure about other things, but this is going to be a massive bill. I mean, there's no doubt about that. It's going to encompass a lot of things that the House, frankly, has needed and needs to get done. So hopefully the Senate, fingers crossed, will go along with some of these initiatives that are in this bill. But the other reason they want it in one bill is because we all know there's some Republicans that do not vote like Republicans, don't really care about what the leadership thinks, and they have to pick some of the Democrats off to get it through, which means you have to put things in the bill that the Democrats want, like the funding for California, fire in North Carolina, and we already talked about SALT. So it's an interesting play here, but it's going to be a huge bill, and there's really nothing you can do about it.
Well, and huge in terms of potential price tag as well when we're thinking of dollar figures. And some of those members you're referring to are people who are very fiscally conservative and want to see requisite spending cuts along with this. Give us an idea of the pay-fors that are actually going to be discussed over the next few days in these rooms.
So the pay-fors, they're going to go through, with Elon Musk's help, go through every single division in the government and see where they can cut. Medicare, Medicaid, I know they've talked about that. Social Security, I don't really see that being viable down at the end. I don't think the members of the Republican Main Street Partnership would vote for cut in those three areas. Okay. But there is a lot of waste in the federal government. I mean, let's be honest here. So if we can find some of that for offsets, that's where they'd prefer to go. But we also do know President Trump does not mind debt. I mean, he has it in his personal business. I mean, he doesn't mind debt. I realize there's some Democrats or some Republicans that are really opposed to it, but the president really is not opposed to it. So I think that he'll be comfortable with not finding total offsets.
Called himself the king of debt, if you remember a couple of years ago.
Did.
Why not get a little more? With that said, then, you start wondering about the calendar. And a very ambitious approach at one point by Mike Johnson. He said he wanted a budget bill up for a vote the end of February. That would require a small miracle at this point, I assume. But what's the realistic timetable here? They have a few months to play with.
They do. They really have until the end of the year.
Yeah.
So, but please, let's not go to the end of the year. Please. I think probably March into April is a realistic
in the first
time.
half.
Hopefully in the first half, because there is other business that they need to get onto. So they're hoping by the holiday break in April, they hope to have something done.
And debt ceiling is part of that?
Debt ceiling is going to have to be. Wow. We're running out of money. Yeah. So unfortunately, it didn't get taken care of last year. I understand that. I actually agreed with President Trump that he wanted to get it done then. So that needs to get done again the first quarter of this year. It's a lot on the table that needs to get done before April.
Well, especially when you consider the Treasury Department already for the last week has been implementing extraordinary measures that only can go so far, potentially to the summer if we're lucky. I do wonder, though, and you refer to what Donald Trump was asking for at the end of last year, if it's going to be just a temporary extension of the debt ceiling for some period of time, or if his suggestion that it should be done away with entirely is something that can become reality.
I know that the Republican Main Street Partnership members would pretty much like it done entirely. Elizabeth Warren, Senator Warren, agrees with us on that, which I don't think has ever happened before. But it would be better for the country, then we wouldn't have to go through this exercise. We always end up increasing it anyway. So it'd be nice to get it off the table. But that's going to have to get done in the next few weeks.
We talk about spending cuts. There are some areas that you've isolated where spending increases could in fact be the case, and the Pentagon's going to be one of them. Rick Davis was the first to mention the first $1 trillion defense budget. Will that be the story in this bill that we're talking about, $1 trillion on the Pentagon?
I think it will be. It's going to be.
Main Street would be behind that.
I think so, at least most of the members. Obviously, one of our members, Ken Calvert, is the appropriator over the Defense Department. But we've given a lot to Ukraine. We have to rebuild what we've given to Ukraine. So that's part of this as well. Plus, we need new technology. Right. I don't know if we're going to fight any more ground wars. It's probably going to be intelligence awards, AI type wars. So we need to up our game in that area. And then, of course, I know he wants to spend some of the money on the border for the immigration problem.
Well, to that point, how does the Main Street Partnership, how do the members feel about the way in which the border crackdown is going so far? The deportations, we've seen a very small trade war that started and ended, it seemed, over the weekend over the deportation of migrants. Are they happy with everything they're seeing?
They're absolutely happy with it. I mean, immigration is number one issue. I think that's probably why President Trump was able to be elected again. And they want the border cleaned up. And the people in their districts want this border cleaned up. So I think he had a very successful, so far so good on that. And it was kind of interesting to see how he dealt with the president. President kind of caved. President Trump said, okay, we won't send them on military planes, we'll send them on commercial. So I think there was some negotiation there. It worked out, and we'll continue to send them home.
So that's the playbook. Did he prove that tariffs work?
I think he did. I think there's no doubt about it. I mean, they came to the table pretty quickly on that.
Just the threat of a tariff.
Just exactly.
Interesting. Right. Yeah. Here we are again. Sarah Chamberlain, great to see you. Seems unfair somehow. 75 degrees in Miami, but there's still snow on the ground. But you're here with us. We're lucky for that. My apologies, although we do want pictures of the slide. From the Republican Main Street Partnership, Sarah Chamberlain, one of the most connected Republican voices that will bring you here on this program. When they come back, they're going to have a lot of work to do, Kailey.
Yeah, and they're going to have to do it in pretty short order. Did you hear, Sarah? Just a matter of weeks to deal with the debt ceiling. Maybe we're not going to push it so close to the X date this
You said
time.
the two words, extraordinary measures. That's our reality right now. We'll have a lot more with our panel coming up next. Rick Davison and Jeanne Zaino are with us on the Monday edition of Balance of Power. We're glad you are too.
You're listening to the Bloomberg Balance of Power podcast. Catch us live weekdays at noon and 5 p.m. Eastern on Apple CarPlay and Android Auto with the Bloomberg Business app. You can also listen live on Amazon Alexa from our flagship New York station. Just say, Alexa, play Bloomberg 1130.
Rest assured that Washington is taking note of what we're seeing in financial markets today. All of it, of course, precipitated by DeepSeek and concerns over potential cheaper but just as capable technology coming from China, something that the U.S. has been trying to prevent through export controls and other means, and certainly something that is likely to get the attention of this just brand new Trump administration 1 week in, keeping in mind that the president has signed executive orders within the last few days pertaining to artificial intelligence and announced a near $500 billion AI infrastructure development deal between Oracle and SoftBank and OpenAI, who may now find themselves having to compete with DeepSeek. All of it, of course, in the midst of what has been a flurry of other executive action unrelated to artificial intelligence, but some of it related to new generation technology of another type. Joe, as Bloomberg has learned that today Donald Trump is preparing an executive order to create a next generation defense shield to protect the U.S. against ballistic missiles. This is the U.S. Iron Dome we've long heard him teasing.
Yeah, he talked about this on the campaign trail. He talked about it in his first term. Not sure how that would work. We're talking about a much larger area
3.8
we would need to defend.
Square miles.
Yeah, this isn't. It's not a real dome. We actually need to send missiles up. You've seen this in use in the skies over Israel. Would require uncounted numbers of ground-to-air missiles, interceptors, essentially, and would be a boon for defense contractors like Raytheon if it were to happen.
Well, and the newly minted defense secretary, Pete Hegseth, seems on board. When he arrived at the Pentagon for his first real day of work in that job, he talked about this idea as well as some other initiatives now that he, thanks to J.D. Vance casting the tie-breaking vote, has been able to take over as the helm of that department.
That was the moment, late Friday, J.D. Vance in the motorcade to cast the deciding vote that made, indeed, Pete Hegseth the new Secretary of Defense. If you're with us on Bloomberg TV or on YouTube, you see his arrival there at the Pentagon a bit earlier today, a chilly Monday morning in Washington in January, and that's where we start with our signature panel. Bloomberg Politics contributors Rick Davis and Jeanne Zaino are with us. She is Democratic analyst and political science professor at Iona University. Rick is Republican strategist and partner at Stone Court Capital. Jeanne, what does it tell you when J.D. Vance has to cast the deciding vote on such an important appointment?
It tells us that, the margin that they're working with in the Senate is very slim. And I think many of us thought that perhaps McConnell would go no only if there was a fourth no. But that's not what he did. He went no regardless of that. And so that means that in my mind at least, questions not only about Trump's upcoming nominations, who are controversial, like Gabbard and RFK Jr. this week and Kash Patel, but also Trump's agenda. Does Mitch McConnell turn out to be, I don't know, the new Lisa Murkowski or Susan Collins or Joe Manchin on the Democratic side, who's willing to stand up and say no to Donald Trump? And that is going to mean that Donald Trump's either going to have to pull some Democrats, which is unlikely if he's lost Murkowski, Collins, and of course, McConnell. Or is he going to play ball with McConnell on things he cares about, like national security and also Senate rules? So there is a lot that this portends, and we just don't know how it's going to play out.
Well, and we also don't know how things will go down in committee on Thursday when Tulsi Gabbard, who Jeanne just mentioned, Rick, will have her confirmation hearing, knowing she's faced a great deal of scrutiny for past behaviors, including a visit to Syria some years ago. This is actually something that Senator Lindsey Graham, Republican senator, I would add, spoke about on Meet the Press yesterday.
I tend to vote for almost everybody at both parties, but I want to see how the hearing goes. Why did you go to Syria? What did you do regarding Assad? Why do you think Edward Snowden should be held as a hero? I certainly don't. We'll see how the hearing goes. But in her favor, Richard Burr is going to introduce her, and he's one of my dearest friends. So we'll see.
Rick, there's a few questions I could ask you around this. One being just how you view Tulsi Gabbard's prospects right now ahead of this hearing. The other being, what impact will the shepherding of Richard Burr have for her?
Yeah, I think, first of all, you've got a pretty compliant Republican caucus. Someone told me over the weekend when these votes were being taken that there are a lot of senators, Republican senators, think they're John McCain, but they act like Tom Tillis. And that is kind of a, way to think about it. They think they're going to be tough. They think they're going to run these people through their marks. And then what they wind up doing is going along with the president. In some cases, it's reelection fear. Some cases, it's not worth the agony to be set up. In some cases, they have other priorities that they want to get done. I mean, the Lindsey Graham comments are really instructive. Lindsey Graham does usually vote favorably for both Republican and Democratic senators, judges, you name it. He thinks that's the president's prerogative, and a lot of senators feel that way. They would have to have something extraordinary. And to march in a former senator who was the chairman of the Intelligence Committee and who was well liked amongst the caucus members to introduce Tulsi Gabbard, smart move. And he's got nothing to lose. He could do whatever he wants to do with his free time, and he chooses to come back to D.C. and front for her nomination. Look, I mean, I think as we've just recounted, there are 3 consistent votes against people who probably shouldn't be in these jobs. The question is, who's that 4th person? And that, I think, is really hard to figure out.
Interesting. We weren't supposed to know about Richard Burr. I guess Lindsey Graham let that slip, so that must have been an interesting moment for Richard Burr, who will be, not only walking her around and doing the meetings and so forth, I guess introducing her before the confirmation hearing, Jeanne, but Richard Burr, of course, this is a former chair of the Intelligence Committee, has been offering advice and counsel in recent weeks here. Will he improve her chances of being confirmed?
I think he will. Certainly he knows how this is going to play out for her in the hearing. He knows what to tell her to watch out for. And we heard Tom Cotton on Fox News over the weekend saying essentially that she is going to have a fair hearing. But it's interesting when you hear that, because what he is saying is, I'll guarantee the process, but not the outcome, which suggests that there may be a 4th no out there somewhere, if not more. Tulsi Gabbard is the one who's most likely to go down, although historically, once you get to the hearing, that's not something that usually happens. And it's all the issues that Kailey mentioned. And then it's her flip-flopping on 702, which has been troubling to many on particularly the Republican side. So this is somebody who we're going to have to watch for, along with, of course, Kash Patel this week. And of course, there's other hearings as well, including RFK Jr. And those are the 3 sort of most controversial that Trump has nominated.
Well, but when we consider the president, Jeanne, fresh off what ultimately, though hard fought, was a victory in getting Pete Hegseth confirmed, then maybe the shortest ever trade war between the U.S. and Colombia to make sure that migrants could be deported back to that country on military aircraft through threat of tariffs, and the Colombian president quickly agreed to Trump's terms, we understand. Is this not a lesson that Donald Trump, by and large, is getting what he wants, at least for now? Why would we believe that there is going to be an exception to that rule so early in this term?
Yeah, I wouldn't suggest that we know she's going to go down. I think the thinking is she's the most vulnerable of those left. That doesn't mean by any stretch of the imagination she goes down. And Donald Trump is having a very good first week. But let's not forget what just happened. And you were just talking about. The Chinese came out and they shot a gun over the bow. There is no question on the timing here of the Chinese coming out with all of this information on DeepSeek, not just how much it cost, but what was involved in the creation. That is a warning that Donald Trump's smooth sailing may not be so smooth around the world, that this competition is very real. So yes, he's got some important short-term wins here, but it is not going to be smooth sailing. It never is for the president.
I keep asking Rick on this DeepSeek matter, why not, if you're Donald Trump, why not just ban it if it's scooping up Gmail accounts and phone numbers of Americans, or would that make it more difficult for him to rationalize keeping TikTok around?
Yeah, well, he could always flip-flop on TikTok again, right? I mean, like, why don't we just come to agreement that these pernicious kind of businesses that are really sponsored by the Chinese Communist Party and are collecting enormous amount of data on everything we do in our lives should not be allowed to prosper in the United States. It's nuts. And I think that if you have consistency in the administration, you'd look at this and many of these other apps that are people flocking to outside of TikTok, and you'd shut them down immediately. And why give access to our data and our information when we don't have reciprocity in China? Simply put, forget all the national security implications, which are not insignificant. Donald Trump wants to make it tough for countries that don't allow our businesses to prosper in their markets. China's the worst offender. Go after them first.
Well, Rick, when we look at what's happening in the markets today, the NASDAQ 100 now down 3.3%. NVIDIA obviously is creating a massive drag over the implications for that company. But are you surprised? Because I'm a little surprised that we haven't heard from Donald Trump about this yet, knowing how he likes to use the stock market as a barometer for how he himself is doing as president.
Well, he hasn't put it out yet. So, I mean, maybe we'll hear from him later this afternoon. But I wouldn't be surprised that we get a Truth Social post, even while he's still on the golf course before the dinner tonight with Republican leadership, that says something, gives the country some indication of where his mind is, because it has been doing the wander a little bit on this issue. And we'd like to see it wander back to some place that has strategic value to the United States.
All right, Rick Davis and Jeanne Zaino, our signature political panel. Thank you so much.
Thanks for listening to the Balance of Power podcast. Make sure to subscribe if you haven't already at Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. And you can find us live every weekday from Washington, D.C. at noontime Eastern at Bloomberg.com.